That music is just awesome, isn't it? I really, really love it. And it's an indication for you that the Gracious Guest show has commenced and that you are currently listening to the Gracious Guest program, the Gracious Guest podcast. I am your host, Mike Creevy, host of the Gracious Guest, and I am so happy that you are taking some time out of your day to join me today. And today, I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I haven't really addressed this. I don't really know what category this fits in. I usually have a couple of categories, whether it's movie reviews or thoughts on theological implications in Star Wars, or philosophical ones, or a book review about a particular book that's just something about truth, goodness, and beauty that I think is worth sharing. I do that kind of stuff, right? Talk about music, talk about life, and all these kinds of things. And at the core of all of it is the sense of wonder. The stuff that we can't quite put our finger on, right? The stuff that we kind of, don't so much control, but leap into. And with that in mind, I thought I'd talk a little bit today about stage fright. Stage fright, right? So almost all of us have some experience of stage fright. They always say that I guess in repeated polls of different audiences, different demographics, public speaking is like the number one fear of most people, it seems. Being in front of a crowd, some kind of, thing where I have to perform or present in front of people. It's this terrifying thing. And Jerry Seinfeld, I think, once pointed out that the second is death. And then he led him to point out that means that for the average person, that if you have to be at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So whether or not that's true, it does seem like a lot of us have this fear. And I actually tell my students every now and then, especially if they're about to give a presentation, I'm trying to encourage them that, here, I teach every single day. I'm usually in front of 6 classes a day of high school students. And I'm not saying I have stage fright or I have clear jitters or butterflies every single time, but more often than most of them think, they would assume, well, no, you do this every day, you're used to it. But, no, there's always a little bit of, performance anxiety, right? And, there's a whole lot of factors obviously involved in that, right? We want to do our best. We're maybe concerned that we won't do our best if we haven't prepared for something, for instance, or we're a little kind of unsure of ourselves with the topic we're talking about, or it's something at work like a new product or new project or something like that we've been assigned, and we're not too sure about the details, and we're trying to impress our boss, or there's someone at work who you have a crush on and you want to do a good job in front of them because you want to impress them. Like, there's all these factors that could play into to what gives us stage fright. If you're performing, right, for some sort of musical or vocal performance, a tryout for some district band or choir or American Music Abroad, or you're trying out for some sort of audition for a play or for a Broadway production or for a film, whatever it is, you're on the spot, right? And we use that phrase, you're on the spot. And there's this fear I think we run into sometimes, because at the core of it, I almost think it has something to do with the fear, not just that I'm going to mess up, but they're going to see me. Even if you're like a really, really, let's say you're a tremendously great singer, and sometimes we see this, they even incorporate it into the movie Sing. One of the characters has this, where there's this shyness, and it has nothing to do with like not being talented. I mean, this particular character, and this happens in real life all the time, is a phenomenal singer, but somehow is terrified of letting people know that, or having people hear her sing. And why? Well, they'll know me. It's this mysterious thing. It's this, I can't quite put my finger on it. There's an intimacy. There's a fear of maybe rejection. I'm putting myself out there, and what will they say? What will they say? What will be the reaction that these people will have when I bare my soul, I put myself out there? And, it makes sense that it's something that terrifies so many people when you really get right down to it. And, it's I think a lot of it's about a sense of vulnerability, right? Nobody wants to be vulnerable, because if you're vulnerable, something bad could happen. And I think that's a big part of it too. The fear of the unknown, the fear of what could happen. What if I mess this up? What if I, what if I don't mess it up, but what if it goes well, right? Because part of it's, what if I mess this up and then everyone makes fun of me and all that kind of stuff. But then also, what if this goes really well? What if it leads to something else? What if it leads to me doing well in this audition? And then there's a next step. Because the thing is, it's not usually about some kind of grand final performance. It's potentially an open door into future performances, future situations where you're going to be on the spot, whether it's at work and presentations you have to give. In fact, I'll share a little bit of my background with this. And I mean, like anybody else growing up, I had to give reports and talks and stuff in school sometimes, or like present about something. And I think, as far back as I can remember, I would always be very nervous about it. But then by the same token, I usually, saw that it worked out pretty well in the end. That was most of my experience, was pretty much positive. And I'd get the jitters, I'd get nervous. Sometimes a particular solo or a particular performance would work out better than another one had, but if it didn't, there's always something you can do about it. You can practice, you can try again. It's the kind of stuff in life, I think, that teaches all of us one way or the other. And, and you also learn about yourself. How do you deal with failure? How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with something not really working out the way you had hoped? And then what kind of talents that you maybe didn't know you had do you discover along the way? What maybe talents do you discover that you don't have, that maybe you should go a different direction? And I can't help but think here of, I think it was like in ROTC days when I was in college. What would happen was, you had to give a couple briefings and presentations in class, and there's a particular format a lot of times for an Army briefing. It's not entirely unique to the Army, but, you kind of learn, as with any field, with any profession, you learn how certain expectations need to be met and certain styles of presenting information that you have to do. And I'll never forget, I don't know how it really started, but at some point, I think I had to give a briefing when I was first commissioned in the Army. And then, I don't know if it could have been any number of things. It could have been a combination of the fact that maybe some people in my unit just didn't want to do certain briefings, and I was agreeing to do it or whatever. I was a team player. I don't know, mixed with maybe the fact that maybe I was doing pretty well at it, and I think I did have a talent for that, or was able to present, and I think I have a knack, at least in general, for presentations and for communicating, and I think somewhere along the line it became this sort of thing, like, well, if we have a presentation again, we'll just have Creevy do it. So I kind of got used to it. It was this thing where you try really hard to do the best you can, and then it works out pretty well, and then people remember that it worked out pretty well, and then they pick you to do it again next time, and then before you know it, you're the presenter guy, and sometimes that would be for briefings and stuff like that, but it could also be for events, like emceeing events. And honestly, looking back on it, it's maybe a lot of those circumstances and situations that led me to more or less know how I go about preparing for something, and how to prepare something I'm going to communicate, and certain things that I try to improve in terms of how I communicate, certain little catchphrases I use when I'm nervous that I want to try to not use, and that sort of thing. It's difficult, but it's also rewarding. And that stage fright sometimes, that performance anxiety, can oftentimes be, part of the process of making sure that you take it seriously. And then, of course, the challenge of where's that line, between taking it too seriously or losing sleep over it or freaking out. What's funny about it, though, is even when it doesn't go well, sometimes when it actually does go terribly, you can also learn that, hey, it's not the end of the world. And I must say, I kind of learned that later in life. Well, I mean, compared to where I'm at now, I'm 33, so it's not maybe late in life, but I'll never forget there was a particular briefing I had to give at the end of a annual training event. And if anyone listening to the show was there for it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm just being honest about it now, because I was giving this intel brief, and it was the end of our annual training at Fort Indian Town Gap that year. And I was nervous. And we had been doing, there were a lot of different factors involved. It was a scenario, like a combat scenario, and just part of a training exercise. But the stakes are still pretty high. It can be kind of a nerve-wracking and stressful environment, and you're producing all these products and stuff, and you're trying to make sure that you're doing your job well, and everybody's obviously trying to put the best face on and do the best they can. And long story short, we get to the end of the training event, and it's one of the last briefings in front of the whole staff, basically dozens and dozens of mostly higher ranking people than me, including the general. And it comes to my portion of the brief, and I absolutely blew it. I mean, I'm not being humble in this or anything. It was awful. It sucked. It made no sense. I rambled and I said sentences that weren't real sentences. I just completely lost it. And it was by far the absolute worst case scenario. And all those times you worry about, what if I screw up? That was this time. It was the absolute fulfillment of my worst nightmare about absolutely bombing and not even being able to put words together in a sentence. Just complete nosedive, unlike anything before it or anything since. And it was so bad, because I got to the end of it, and I'll never forget, like, we get to the end of it, and there was like this silence, because we had the headsets on, like we were given it over headsets, but we were all in the same room together and everything. But then there were other people kind of like not Skyping, but sort of like connected through a video conference kind of thing, or there was like a conference call deal, but in this massive room with just dozens of people listening in on it. And it was like so humiliating. And I get to the end of it, and I just hear this like pause, this pregnant pause that was just absolutely, so much was being said without anything being said. And it was so obvious, like, how confused the general was, especially over, like, what, like, did this kid just have, like, some sort of, like, brain lapse or a seizure or something? Like, what just happened? I mean, it was so bad. And then my sergeant at the time, just amazing guy. Like, he didn't make fun of me. He just sort of looked at me for a second, kind of nodded, and then he's like, sir, this is Sergeant so-and-so, and like he jumped in and he's like, so basically what we're going with, and he just totally like swooped in and saved me, and it was absolutely incredible. And I owe him to this day, and always will, for basically just rescuing me. And I told him later, I'm like, dude, thank you, because I don't know what just happened to me. So it was just, it was a worst case scenario. It was one of those things where I actually did have a moment where it completely fell apart. I felt a little bit like Anne Hathaway in The Princess Diaries, when she has her speech and it just completely doesn't go well. It happens in movies, it happens in real life, and you see the situation, your fears, like, is everyone going to laugh at me and everything? And at the end of the day, I'm sure some people did, but I don't think anybody laughed at me harder than I did. And it wasn't because I'm so awesome, but it was just because, I don't know, it just sort of, I decided to deal with it the way I did. And maybe that's the lesson really here, if there is a lesson, in terms of at least something that I feel like I have arrived at when it comes to stage fright and performance anxiety, or those fears of the what ifs, the what's this going to mean in the long run? Is it going to mean something that's good for me? Is it going to mean some kind of advancement, some kind of promotion, some kind of recognition that I've been hoping to somehow receive, or I've been working towards, or at least would like if it would happen? Is it going to mean some sort of reputation destroying kind of thing where I'm never going to be asked back? If it's like some kind of emceeing event. And believe me, guys, I mean, I think we've all heard people totally botch something where they weren't invited back. And, if it wasn't us, we can at least learn from their mistakes, maybe. So, I don't know. I think with stage fright, with any kind of performance anxiety, with any kind of fear of being in front of people, especially public speaking, whatever that might be, I think if there's one or two things I've learned, it is, number one, and this is maybe the simplest and most obvious one of all, something you can do about that is prepare. Learn whatever you need to. Do the best you can. Don't phone it in, first of all. So really give it your best shot. Give it your all. Focus on it. Commit the time that it's going to take. And just do your best. Show up for work, right? I mean, I think Woody Allen, said like 90% of life is just showing up on time, or showing up to work. And a lot of times it's just a matter of that. If you put the work in, you set some time aside, you make sure that you practice, rehearse, and a lot of times it's going to take care of itself. If you're a person of faith, of course, I would mention, and I don't think this only applies to people of faith. I think this is something that's going on behind the scenes, even for those who may not realize it, don't want to admit it. But the Holy Spirit, the presence of the Holy Spirit helping us sometimes, especially if it's something like a presentation that might have some kind of ministerial or kind of lifestyle impact or something like that, some sort of address at a conference or a retreat or something like that, where it's not that to say that work presentations and stuff like that aren't important. They really are. But if you're talking about something that's going to make a huge impact possibly in someone's life, well, first of all, to not worry so much about that, like, oh, what impact is this going to have? Just, do the work, prepare for it, do the research, do whatever you need to do to prepare whatever you're doing, whatever the speech is or the performance, because this could apply for the impact that music obviously can have on people's life as well. It's a very important part of human life and a very expressive part of human life, and can really have a tremendous impact, can sometimes touch people, affect people in the deep and profound way. So do your homework, do your work, do it ahead of time. Step 2, maybe try as hard as you can when you inevitably start running into those feelings of fear, feelings of, oh, what impact is this going to have, or, oh, is this going to do what I want it to do? At the end of the day, that's not really up to you a lot of times. The impact it has is going to be largely due to all sorts of factors that maybe you have no control over. I mean, honestly, maybe there could be something that you were going to say that should have been the perfect thing that person needed to hear right then and there, but they just weren't listening, quite frankly, or they missed it, or they got distracted. And sometimes I think we run a risk of kind of overplaying our hand a little bit, or thinking too highly of ourselves, or putting too much pressure on ourselves. And all that does is stress us out sometimes, instead of being able to recover a little bit of fun, maybe a little bit of excitement in it. Because that's, presentations, performances, these things don't have to be terrifying and scary experiences. And a lot of times I think we make them into that because we play it up on our heads too much. And even if it is something extremely important, you take the fun out of it. Just because something's extremely important doesn't mean it can't be exhilarating and fun. It doesn't have to be a chore. And I think a lot of times we just sort of do that to ourselves. I know I've done that plenty of times in the past. So anyway, that's just a couple thoughts for today on the Gracious Guest Show. It's kind of a odd, maybe, episode. Maybe it doesn't fit in any category, but this is the show where I try to explore all sorts of things that have to do with the deeper things in life, right? The stuff between the lines, the wonder, the awe, the things I can't quite put my finger on, right? As the French say, a certain je ne sais quoi, right? A little I don't know what. Some of these experiences in life that we all kind of share. And if you like the show, if you enjoy the show, or at least some of the show, some episodes, I just invite you to go over to iTunes and give me a nice review over there if you would. Try to get some reviews of the show going and get the word out about the show. And certainly, use the online form on the website, thegraciousguest.org, to let me know, if you're enjoying the podcast or anything on the website. If you enjoy the blog, if there's a particular thing on there, particular episode that you really enjoyed, you'd like to hear more of or more about, you want to hear more movie reviews or fewer movie reviews, you want to hear more or fewer book reviews, more life stories or fewer of those life stories, whatever the case may be, please feel free to just share your feedback for the Gracious Guest podcast, and I'd really, really appreciate that. So thanks so much. This is Mike Creevy, the Gracious Guest podcast. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.